Yeah, no, we are live. Clement, over to you.
Dumelang, good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this SADC panel discussion on infrastructure development in support of regional integration. My name is Clement Manyatela. I host the Clement Manyatela Show on Radio 702, and I'm honored this morning to be the program director for this important discussion. The Government Communication and Systems and Information System has partnered with the Department of Water and Sanitation. They have partnered with Infrastructure South Africa, the South African National Roads Agency Limited, and the Industrial Development Corporation to bring us this important discussion. And it's an important discussion because infrastructure development is key in growing the economy. When you look at even our economic reconstruction, recovery plans, and infrastructure projects, you see that infrastructure is quite the main feature. So we need even the coordination of these projects in the SADC region so that we can grow our regional economy, we can create jobs, and we can improve that integration. In fact, in the Southern African Development Community, road transport is the most preferred mode of transport for the movement of goods and services and passengers. That's why it's so important that SADC continues to invest in and expand land transport infrastructure. Governments in the region are already doing that, but they need to continue prioritizing investment into road networks so that we improve that cross-border road connectivity. And it's also important for us to share our water resources. And all of this requires great investment. It requires partnerships with the private sector. And I would add, it requires political will as well. So how can we use infrastructure development and infrastructure projects to continue supporting regional integration? And what can we do better? Our panelists this morning will be answering these and other questions. So let me introduce you to the panelists. We've got Lindy Welusenga, who is the DDG for Provincial Entity Governance and International Cooperation at the Department of Water and Sanitation. We are also joined by Mametsi Masemola, who is the head of Infrastructure South Africa. We've got Vusi Mona, who is the head of Marketing and Communications at the South African National Roads Agency Limited. We have Nina Yose, who is the head of Infrastructure at the IDC, responsible for infrastructure development in Southern Africa and the rest of Africa. And later on, we'll be joined by Libuwani Muchachi, who is the former chairperson for the SADC Media Awards. Remember, if you have some inputs or you've got questions as members of the media, you can just put those through the chat box. I will dedicate about 30 minutes or so at the end of this discussion for those inputs and questions. Please always, when you ask a question, just indicate your name and the name of the organization that you represent. So we'll get straight into it. And I want us to start with you, perhaps, Mametsi, as the head of Infrastructure South Africa. Just help us understand what are some of the strategic projects that have been prioritized as Infrastructure South Africa, and how do they help in promoting this regional integration?
Good morning, Clement, and good morning to the colleagues that are on the call. Just to contextualize slightly in responding to your question. So Infrastructure South Africa has been established as a bespoke infrastructure development agency that must help to drive catalytic or priority infrastructure projects in South Africa. So in June or July of 2020, the first batch of strategic integrated projects that were gazetted, meaning that these will be catalytic infrastructure projects, they will be national priority projects, etc. They spanned across 5 sectors in the main. And those would have been network industries, water and sanitation, transport, and in particular road infrastructure projects, ICT infrastructure, as well as energy infrastructure. We added as well at the time, because it was during COVID, human settlements portfolio of projects. So those would have been what we call strategic integrated projects that are aimed at facilitating, not facilitating, but impacting GDP positively, contributing to South Africa's economic competitiveness. Those projects that will be having fiscal impact, less fiscal impact, meaning that the transfer of risk and resourcing and funding and financing those projects must fall to the private sector. So essentially looking at projects that can leverage financing from the private sector, projects that are PPP in nature, projects that are blended finance candidate projects. So we'll look at those projects, and those they were gazetted as such. In the water space, because today we're focusing in the main on the water and sanitation space, we've got at the time, the main project that was more of a regional integrated projects is the Lesotho Highland Scheme. I mean, it's a bulk water infrastructure project. It's a 48 billion rand infrastructure project financed in the main South Africa, and we're piping water from Lesotho into Gauteng and other areas in the country. What we're looking for now is that as we evolve, as we move forward from infrastructure South Africa perspective, that we'll be getting and prioritizing more of such projects from our side to connect the region, to contribute to Africa's own competitiveness, ensuring that there is a there's a movement of goods and people across that are seamless. Looking at digital connectivity projects and looking at road infrastructure networks that I'm sure that Mona will speak to just now, looking at more water and sanitation projects, especially on the bulk water supply, and of course the issues around electricity and transmission projects, electricity transmission projects. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in the main going forward. As I said, for now, really the focus of our strategic integrated projects was mainly to prop up the South African economy at the time. The context has now changed. We're beyond COVID. We're looking to improving the economic fortunes of the country, improving economic growth, etc. So in the coming years and in the coming months, we're going to be focusing a lot more on this truly regional and more continent-wide infrastructure projects. Thanks, Clement.
Well, thank you, Mametsi. And speaking of the water projects, Lindiwe, maybe as the Department of Water and Sanitation, you can just explain broadly what the current status of water infrastructure development is in South Africa and the SADC region.
Yeah, thank you so much, Clement. In the water sector, we are geared to achieving the sustainable development goal of giving water to our people by 2030. If you look at the projects that we have, one of them has been listed by our previous panelist, the Lesotho Highlands, that is one of them. You could see that when it started, it was at a feasibility stage. Now there's dust on the ground. The work has started. And then we also have the Umkomazi water project in KZN, and also the Valgamagara in the Eastern Cape. You would recall it was quite delayed, but there also you see that there's partnership and interest, co-investment with the Mining Leadership Forum in the Eastern Cape. The other one is Umzimvubu. You may recall Umzimvubu has been talked about a lot, but with this administration and going forward, this project, there's work on the ground that has started, and that project is for 8.5 billion. So, and there's Mutse, and which is a cross water transfer, which is a cross boundary between northern Limpopo and Mpumalanga. We are hopeful that with all of these projects, we'll be able to to make a mark and achieve our sustainable development goal and leave no one behind. And what is critical also is to mention that the Lesotho Highlands Water Project is among the projects that were put forward in the SADC master plan. Clement and my panelists, you'll recall that in SADC, the SADC infrastructure master plan was developed in 2012 in order to fast track the implementation of all the projects in all the sectors, looking at the infrastructure deficit at that time. So we are glad to mention that as a country, we have moved forward, and also taking into account that at the African Union level side, there is also the infrastructure development program that has taken form. And we're also happy to mention that the Lesotho Highlands has featured in both the SADC master plan, and also it has featured also in the African Union infrastructure development program. So we are very much happy with that. And also over and above, Clement, for the water sector, since water knows no boundary, we are working with our other parties between Namibia and South Africa to build a dam, which is called the Fuels Drift Dam. We call it North Uver Fuels Drift Dam on the Orange. And also with Zimbabwe also, we have just signed an agreement to transfer water, treated water from Zimbabwe to South Africa. The minister will be signing an agreement in this regard. So what I can say is that the vision of our leaders in Southern Africa through that infrastructure master plan, and also at the AU level, have made sure that we are able to achieve. The last one at the transboundary level is the Lesotho-Botswana water transfer, which will carry water from the Lesotho Highlands through South Africa to Botswana. So you can see that we are not limited by boundaries, but we come up with instruments that will enable us, using the enablers and the political leadership that was granted by our leaders, both at the Southern Africa and also at the African Union. Thank you, Clement.
Well, thank you so much. Vusi, let me bring you in here to talk about road infrastructure. As I indicated earlier, that's a preferred mode of transport for the movement of goods. It's preferred for the movement of just services and passengers as well. As SANRAL, what would you say is the current state of that road infrastructure, not only in South Africa, but in this SADC region? And how does SANRAL promote the development of road networks to enhance this cross-border connectivity?
Thank you, Clement, and fellow panelists, and good morning to members of the media. Clement, the SADC region, which has got 16 member states, has a road network of some 932,000 kilometers or so. Only 13% of that network is paved, clearly indicating a shortfall in paved networks in the region, and therefore impacting the free flow of goods, services, and people. Also interesting to note is that South Africa alone has 750,000 kilometers. So we make up quite a chunk of that 932,000 kilometers. And we locate our efforts in integrating road infrastructure at SANRAL within the greater ambition and indeed regional also ambition of creating a single African market. You cannot do so without an integrated road infrastructure plan or approach. As you have said in your open remarks, roads are the preferred mode of transport. And what is it that we are doing as SANRAL to promote regional road infrastructure development? There are key corridors, Clement, that we have put a lot of investment in, and that we are currently putting investment in. You look at the Maputo corridor that connects Mozambique to South Africa's Gauteng, Limpopo, and Mpumalanga provinces. That started off as a South African project. It stopped at the Libombo border, starting just outside Pretoria, stopping at the Libombo border. But through collaborative efforts and the desire to promote trade in the region, the concessionaire, the SANRAL concessionaire, that is TRAC, responsible for that corridor, through us, managed to get our Mozambican counterparts to also develop the network from on their side, from the border post right up until the city Maputo. And this is just but one example of what we are doing to promote integrated infrastructure development. You also look at the corridor, the north-south corridor that links the port of Durban to Zimbabwe, Zambia, DRC, and indeed to inland markets in South Africa. We are putting over 20 billion rands in developing that corridor. There's currently work going on to improve the N2, N3 corridor that services a lot of trucks that are coming in and out of the country using that corridor. So there is a lot that we are doing to promote this integration. But we are also members of SANRAL. SANRAL is an association of road authorities in the SADC region. We are members of that. I think at some stage we were actually the chairperson of that association. We share notes, we exchange best practices. We have received as SANRAL a number of delegations from the region coming to benchmark and see how we do things. They were fascinated, for example, by our command center in Midrand, the one that is monitoring the highways and was administering the e-tolls. We've received a number of delegations from the region to study that model. I'll pause here, Clement.
Oh, thank you, Vusi. Now, Nina, as the IDC, you are responsible for infrastructure investments in South Africa and the rest of Africa. Help us understand just the overall strategy for financing these strategic infrastructure projects in promoting this integration we're talking about.
Thank you, Clement. Good morning, and morning to the new members of media. So with regards to the IDC is main mandate is industrialization. And within this, it's in South Africa and the rest of Africa. And we've got a particular focus on SADC. And with regards to the priority areas within the IDC is manufacturing. And this covers then agro-processing, clothing and textiles, metal beneficiation and mining, energy, upstream and downstream channels, chemicals, as well as healthcare services. And therefore, when we look at infrastructure, it's infrastructure as an enabler to all these priority sectors that we're looking at. And the focus areas for the IDC then are logistics, water, and telecoms. And incidentally, the IDC has also participated in the Lesotho Highlands Water Project that was mentioned before this. Within logistics, what we're looking at is rail. And rail because rail is the cheapest form of transport that you'll find. Also rail because in light of the climate change that we're looking at, so really we're looking at more efficient uses of energy. But rail is important in that it then moves your commodities from especially the inland countries down to your ports. Also brings in your input raw material required for your manufacturing and beneficiation back into the countries where it's required. We've also identified cold storage as something that's required, especially with regards to your perishable food products within SADC. And then what we then do as IDC, we provide debt funding for these projects. And for SADC, we will fund up to 30% of the total project costs. And because infrastructure typically looks for long-dated funding, it does require patient capital. We then look at 10 years of these loans from anywhere between 10 and 15 years. So in all, that's what IDC does with regards to the infrastructure. It's that we provide debt funding to leverage other lenders that are coming in and de-risk projects, as well as then long-dated funding that's required in line with the infrastructure that's been put in. Thanks, Clement.
Thank you very much for that. And speaking of funding, Mametsi, as Infrastructure South Africa, you mentioned just the diverse portfolio of these strategic projects. And I'm interested to find out what kind of conversations you're having with the private sector in the development and implementation of these projects, because you need them here to fund some of these projects. How are those conversations going? And not only in South Africa, but just broadly in this region?
Great question, Clement. So the National Infrastructure Plan 2050 indicates that just to close the current infrastructure investment gap, we need something in the region of 5.7 trillion. Looking at these priority sectors that I mentioned earlier on, water and sanitation, ICTs, energy, transport, as well as human settlements. And that the fiscus alone will not be able to carry and fund these projects. And therefore, we've got to find mechanisms of bringing in the private sector to participate in the delivery and the financing of these infrastructure projects. And so from our side, there's conversations at different levels insofar as infrastructure financing and funding is concerned. The first is that we have established what we call a Development Partners Forum. So the DPF brings together multilateral development banks, so the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, KfW, the German Funding Agency, and others, African Development Bank, and then as well as the local DFI, so the IDC, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the Public Infrastructure, the PAC, as well as, those will be the main three in terms of the local DFI. So what we do is we have quarterly sessions with the Development Partners Forum. The reason being is that they've got to have line of sight of the current pipeline and the emerging pipeline. Firstly, to ensure that those projects that will be aligned with their mandates, they can support those projects from a project preparation perspective, so we can catalyze additional funding over and above what is provided to ISA or allocated to Infrastructure South Africa for project preparation. We catalyze their project preparation facilities in order to prepare and package these projects such that they are viable and they are bankable. Secondly is when these projects go out to market, that they are very well versed with the financial structuring of these projects, the quantum of funding that will be required from the private sector, and that they are geared towards taking advantage, not taking advantage, but more participating in the funding and financing of those projects. We also have conversations with the National Treasury, and the National Treasury is key because, especially for the funding of public sector infrastructure investment projects and programs, National Treasury is key in that they provide direct funding from the fiscus in terms of concession, in terms of grants, in terms of normal budget allocations, etc. But where projects are going to, some projects may require credit enhancement instruments, for example, in the form of sovereign guarantees and others. So the National Treasury is key in ensuring that whatever financing mechanisms that are put in place, they are they're compliant with the current legal dispensation, whether it's your fiscal policies from the National Treasury, the relevant guidelines, circulars, and other regulatory and other regulations that are in place. So just to make sure that those things, the financing and the funding of those projects are actually compliant in that regard. From a SADC perspective, in terms of our own national infrastructure plan, we computed that the current projects that they've always been mooted, like to support economic corridor developments, like and that the Mona has indicated, and so on. We need something in the region of 380 billion rand by 2040, 380 billion US dollars by 2040 to finance those projects. So then that funding is never going to be able to, it's unaffordable to many governments, including South Africa, for that matter. And therefore, the participation of the private sector is key to the delivery of these projects and to take them from being mere concepts for these projects to be developed properly, packaged properly, as well as go through the procurement phase and finally being delivered on the ground. So the issues around the infrastructure financing and funding, Clement, is quite critical if we are to achieve the goals that we've set for ourselves as as South Africa and different countries in the region, in SADC, and as well as on the African continent. Thank you.
Mm. Lindy, I imagine what's also critical is the cooperations and partnerships. What is the sense when it comes to just SADC and the working relationship it has with other international organizations and donor agencies in supporting the water project?
Okay, the cooperation is excellent. The reason being that our partners can see that we are also willing to put in the funds. We have been supported by institutions like Bukridif, Global Environmental Fund, as an example, and many others who have shown in the African Development Bank, who has funded us the feasibility study in that line that I talked about, the Lesotho-Botswana water transfer. And also the CRIDIF has supported us on that North Uver Dam that we are building with a Fields Drift North Uver Dam between South Africa and Namibia. So there is an appetite because of the commitment and also because of the manner in which we intricately commit, and also the instruments of governance that we have deployed to enable us to manage these projects, such as, for an example, the Lesotho Highlands. And over and above, yes. We've
continue.
Yes, thank you, sorry. At local level, the industry has come on board, particularly the organized business, like the mining forums, that have really taken up and also assisted us in our local projects. Thank you.
And Vusi, for SANRAL, how are the cooperations and the collaborations looking like? Not only on the continent, but also trying to attract funding and investments even outside.
Clement, it's a wonderful working relationship we have with the region, working through the SANRAL platform. There is obviously a challenge when it comes to funding. The fiscus can only fund so many things, and there are competing priorities. As SANRAL, what we have innovatively done, and I dare say, with all humility, I think we're the pioneers when it comes to PPP model through the Maputo Development Corridor. So We have sought to go out to the capital markets to make up for what the fiscus cannot fund. It makes the delivery of the infrastructure much quicker than would have been the case had we waited for the bucket to get full at Treasury. And we have received a lot of support from the private sector. Whenever we go to the bond markets, the paper is always taken up. We've got a good reputation there among funders, in spite of the recent challenges around the GFIP in Gauteng, which is about 201 kilometers. In spite of those challenges, we are seeing a continued confidence in our scripts by the capital markets. And we think going forward, as South Africans, colleagues, we need to have a mature conversation about how we fund road infrastructure in particular and infrastructure in general. We need to have a serious discussion around the user pay principle, because we are not going to develop infrastructure without, I think, embracing this principle. Of course, we have to do it in a transparent manner, and stakeholders must be consulted. But we can't be schizophrenic about our attitude towards the private sector and its role in financing infrastructure development.
Thank you for that, Vusi. We'll come back to it a little later on. Nina, just still on the issue of financing, do you, as the IDC, have specific initiatives to enhance this cooperation with development partners in the financing of these regional infrastructure projects?
Thanks for the question, Clement. Yes, we do. So within the IDC, we have what we call our project development department, where we develop projects from inception, from concept, as Mametsa was speaking about concept earlier on. So there we provide up to 50% of the project development costs that are required with the sponsor that's in question, that has required the funding. And not only do we provide the funding, we also provide the skills. IDC is employees that are engineers, CAs. So we also then provide the skills in terms of managing this project up to bankability. And once they then reach bankability, we will then go to the market with the sponsor to then get the required funding, be it debt or equity, to get the project down to commercialization stage. And if you look at with regards to Mozambique, our flagship project there is Mozal, that we started, I think, around 2000. So there we partnered with a number of international partners in bringing the project to fruition. And then secondly, then, as I said, it's the direct lending that we do for existing projects that are there, where we provide them the debt. And like I said earlier on, is that we want to share the risk with other lenders. We also work with partners such as other agencies, such as ECIC, the Export Credit Insurance Company, where we have a tailor-made product, especially for export of South African products to the rest of SADC. And then lastly, as IDC, we do use our balance sheet to get funding from other international DFIs, specifically for funding infrastructure projects within South Africa and SADC.
Mm-hmm. Mametsa, I would like you to pick up on what Vusi was raising just now about the need to be honest and have a frank conversation about other ways to finance these infrastructure projects. And he mentioned this user pay principle. You mentioned earlier that you're going to need about $380 billion or so by 2040. I mean, many governments, if not all, as you said, are not going to be able to afford that, which is why it's important to have these strategic partnerships even with the private sector. Is this something you are also considering as Infrastructure South Africa when you are thinking about ways to raise money in order to finance this project, whether it's road infrastructure or other projects, this user pay principle?
Thanks, Clement. So obviously the issue of the user pay principle is a policy matter, right? It's a policy matter that is being addressed by the Department of Transport as the mandate department, engaging with the National Treasury, and as well as the Gauteng government in particular, because this is about the e-tolls in Gauteng. We leave the issues of the policy matters to the mandate departments, because if Infrastructure South Africa in itself is not, one, a juristic person, two, is not a mandate holder, so it's not a policy giver. We surface some of the impediments to infrastructure investment and infrastructure development, be it at the policy level, at the regulatory level, at the legislative level. So our job is to surface those and indicate to the policy givers that until these matters are resolved, and resolved quite definitely, there could be an impact, there could be an impediment to infrastructure investment, both in South Africa and also impacting the cross-border infrastructure projects. So from our side, our role is essentially to surface those, but not necessarily being as a driver or to resolve them, but we are a participant and an input maker in the processes to resolve those matters and to unlock those blockages from a policy perspective. This one, we give it to, we let the policy giver, the mandate department, the line function department to lead those conversations, because ultimately they are the people that set the tone and the context for policy development in the country.
Lindy, where do you think we need to improve as the SADC region when it comes to the cooperation as member states for the development of transboundary water infrastructure projects? And do you think there are specific mechanisms or agreements in place to manage these shared water resources among SADC countries? Lindiwe, please, can you just unmute yourself there?
Oh,
Sorry.
my apologies, yes.
Thank you.
It's very important to cooperate, because when you share a river, Clement, you have to jointly manage it. It's a very complex issue. You need to look at the issues of allocation. You need to look at the issues of water quality. And hence, we develop those instruments for us to be able to collaborate. And from time to time, we move across countries to a neighboring state to actually cooperate. Because in terms of the international water cooperation indicators, it's very important for you to have a commission, which is a governance structure that looks at the cooperation, because there are political decisions that needs to be taken. And also you need to have the actual cooperation that entails moving to and fro, and making sure that you also manage some of the intricate things like the stream flows, and also need to negotiate and jointly manage, say, for an example, the gauging stations, so that we don't flood each other. A country upstream can flood a country downstream. So we have used the instruments such as the revised SADC protocol on shared water courses, which has guided us to ensure that we share the water equitably. We don't want wars, Clement. The next wars may come if we are not organized. That is why we are organized in this fashion. And also we need to talk about funding mechanisms when we build an infrastructure and take decisions that we can live with. For an example, the Lesotho Highlands is not in our country, but we are benefiting. We need to negotiate all of those. And if you don't have a governance structure that is looking at that, if you don't have even the political commitment, which is an indicator for international water cooperation, then you will lose the plot, and there will be disarray, and water as an enabler will cause unnecessary what is it, discomfort among the people that are living along the basins, and also the water will be, even in terms of drought, also you need to negotiate, and even when it is flooding also. That is why we cooperate, so that there's constant conversation. We don't sleep, Clement, when you manage those stations across the networks of our shared river basins. And we also, over and above, we have those trilateral agreements, but we also have the bilateral agreements amongst ourselves, so that it is easy. Some of, like you find, for an example, a river like the Orange Sinku, where the Lesotho Highlands is based, it straddles across to Botswana and Namibia and Lesotho. So it's very important that you have those instruments handy, so that, and also that actual cooperation as an indicator, so that you can be able to manage and jointly secure sustainability of the resource.
Yes, I just want to remind the members of the media, if you've got questions, please start preparing them on the chat box. You can put them there, just put your name, the name of the organization that you represent as well. If you are directing that question specifically to a particular panelist, just also indicate so. We'll be getting to your questions in a moment, so please start populating them on the chat box. Vusi, you mentioned earlier the 932,000 kilometers of road infrastructure or so in the region, and you said 13% of that is actually paved. What are some of the consequences of that when you've got this road infrastructure, but it's not properly managed and it's not properly paved, especially in the context that you explained earlier around this being the preferred mode, whether you talk about the transportation of goods and services or passengers, because I imagine there's a greater impact here on the economy when we are not sorting out that road infrastructure even within the region.
Yes, yes, Clement. The consequences of having a shortfall in a paved network is that goods cannot get to market. In the SADC region, whole continent, you have a lot of subsistence farmers, for an example, who need to get their eggs to the market. Now, if they are going to be driving on roads that are not paved, gravel roads, by the time they get to market, all the eggs are broken. It's a silly example, but practical, right? So goods will not get to market, or it will take long for goods to get to market, and therefore choke economic growth and development. But the other key is that the little paved network that we have, we must properly maintain it. Maintenance is very important. At SANRAL, we have developed a very robust routine road maintenance system, which is a source of fascination for the region, and even for countries beyond the region. They come to look at how we manage to keep at least the national road network in tip-top condition. But I also want to add, Clement and fellow panelists, that in the SADC region, we do have pockets of excellence that when it comes to infrastructure development and financing, that unfortunately we are sometimes modest and shy to replicate across the region. I look at the Kazungula Bridge, which is the road and rail bridge over the Zambezi between Zambia and Botswana. Excellent demonstration of what can be done between two countries. Prior the construction of this bridge, people used to get across by ferry. And you look at the economic consequences, the trade results of just that bridge. excellent case study of what we can do. And it is, by the way, financed through the user pay principle. So there are pockets of excellence, right, in the region. It's a question of us, being imaginative and embracing these and not being shy to replicate them across SADC.
Mameti, maintenance, I think what we've seen, to pick up on what Vusi is raising around the maintenance of infrastructure, that has been a challenge that I suppose that as Infrastructure South Africa, you've also been trying to focus on. What are the plans around that? I mean, when you look at the infrastructure plan, the National Infrastructure Plan 2050, what are the plans around the maintenance of that infrastructure, and not just maintenance, but even the security of that infrastructure? Because in the past, we've seen how inadequate in some instances that security hasn't been.
Thanks, Clement. You're quite right. So we also surface the issues around maintenance of infrastructure. So Infrastructure South Africa's role is to mine strategic infrastructure projects, right? Or what we would think of as catalytic infrastructure projects. We help to prepare and package those projects such that they receive funding and financing, right? So they are not necessarily projects that are already funded by the National Treasury. We work with the project sponsor, we work with the project owner to develop a robust and comprehensive business case such that that project then is viable and it is bankable. Part of that preparation work, as we do that project preparation and developing the business case, is that we also model in that the budget that will be required for maintenance over the life of the infrastructure project. So that total life cycle costing is quite key. Because we look at the issues that have been talked about by my panelists here on the call, that lack of maintenance of road infrastructure, ports, any infrastructure will cost us more once the infrastructure has degraded to such an extent that it cannot even be rehabilitated in some instances. But completely new infrastructure has to be installed because of lack of maintenance. So we've built that in the modeling exercise, in the development of this business case, so that we can be able to indicate what would be the amount on an annual basis to deal with preventative maintenance program, as well as daily maintenance of these of the infrastructure. So that's where we are in relation to that. We also work very closely with National Treasury, because National Treasury has got a system called the Infrastructure Development Management System. And that system ensures that the user departments or the owner of the project of the infrastructure pays attention to and actually budgets and allocates a ring-fence budget for the maintenance of that particular infrastructure. On the security component, which is very an important question, there are a number of initiatives currently being implemented to deal with the issues around the security of infrastructure. I mean, the damage to critical infrastructure in this country has got devastating economic impact. And so there is a lot more focus on that at the moment. And you know that our own Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure is championing the work around the construction mafia. There is also a structure that has been put in place. Its membership is the NPA, is the SIU, is the law enforcement agencies, and it's checked by the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, just looking at issues around the security of installed infrastructure, and then of course working with the private sector, because there's great initiatives as well that have been put in place and are beginning to make a dent in relation to the destruction of of critical infrastructure in the country. So there is work underway in that respect, Clement. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I just want to bring in, before we get to the questions now, to bring in Lebohane Mochachi, who's the former chairperson for the SADC Media Awards. Lebohane, if you can just tell us about the SADC Media Awards competition and how journalists can participate in this competition, and when is the closing date?
Thank you so much, Clement, and the rest of the panelists that are here. We are actually just 7 days away from the closing date for the SADC Awards Media Competition for 2023. So the closing date is the 29th of February every single year. So it's quite easy for journalists to sort of remember all the time because the date never changes. What is important, though, is that the stories that we are looking for should have been published in the preceding year, meaning that these are stories that should have been published from January 2023 up until the 31st of January, up until the 31st of December 2023. We have 4 categories that are in the competition. We cater for television, we have radio, we also have print, and we also have television. So in all that, what we are trying to do is all this kind of information that we have been getting from the panelists today is also part of the stories that we are looking for, stories that talk of regional integration and possibly what countries, the 16 countries that were mentioned earlier, are doing together to try and solve the problems of the region. For instance, what makes a story that is covering regional integration? It means that in how we look at it, you should have been doing a story that at least mentions 2 or more countries that are doing something. Earlier on, it was mentioned when we were talking about road infrastructure, for instance, the issue of the Kazangula Bridge, for instance, where it has been made easy for transportation, cross-border transportation between goods of 2 countries or more. Those are the kinds of stories that can also be covered. We're looking at stories probably that have to do with the economy or currency. Those can also be covered. But generally, what are the issues that people in the region are worried about? And what is government, the different governments within those countries, what are they doing in order to ensure that the people get a better life for all? That is what we're looking for. But for more information, for instance, looking at the time, if you go onto the website of the GCIS, www.gcis.gov.za, and also the www.sadc.int, that is where you will find the forms and the competition rules.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Lebohane. I want us to get to the questions now. I'll start with a question from Nosipho, who says, good morning. Thank you for this informative session. I'm Nosipho Hani here on behalf of Plug City Hype. And this is the question that Nosipho has. What are the key infrastructure projects that are planned or that are underway in the SADC region, and how will they benefit the youth in terms of employment and economic opportunities? Our audience is largely youth, and we believe that your answer would be of value to them. Thank you for the opportunity. Nosipho, thank you for the question. Mameti, do you want to maybe start, and then I'll get the others as well to respond if they are able to on this question from Nosipho around the projects that are planned or underway in the SADC region, and how those are going to be benefiting the youth in terms of employment and economic opportunities.
No, thanks, Clement. That's a great question, Nosipho. On our side, so Infrastructure South Africa is not a project owner. So we don't own any project as ISA. We work with the project owners and the project sponsors to develop and prepare their projects so that they can be funded and they can be financed. So as a result, we also, because of the legal construct in the country and the legal dispensation, we also don't get involved with procurement issues etc., where the issues around the preferential regulations, the BE component transformation, and so on. We don't get to involved at that level, but we do, as part of that preparation of the project, we must be able to compute the level of transformation and utilization of local content in those projects. So local content in terms of the actual products that are going to be utilized, that are locally manufactured, and those that are designated as such by the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, steel, cement, and others. And then also local content insofar as the labor absorption from in terms of those projects are concerned. So to as much as possible, we advocate for the utilization of local labor in the deployment of those projects and the implementation of those projects, as many skills to be harnessed and harvested from the local areas where those projects are being implemented. Some of the projects that we are spearheading that has got the regional agenda to it, one of them is Lesotho Highlands, and the DDG is here, talked extensively around that project. There's also the 6 border post projects. So these are the border posts that are currently going to be upgraded and developed to world-class standards. So those are 6. These projects are 6 of them. In the country, there's 55 ports of entry, but the 6 are being prioritized over the next 3 years for development. This is a 9.6 billion rand project between the Department of Home Affairs, National Treasury, the Infrastructure Fund, and Infrastructure South Africa. There are also strategic integrated, there's also special economic zones. In particular, the 2 that comes to mind is the Nkomazi SEZ, Special Economic Zone, to link South Africa and Maputo. There's also the Namakwa SEZ that anchors the entire Bohobay port development. Both of these are very big projects, multi-billion rand projects, and we will be advocating and working with the project sponsor and the project owner to ensure that at the time when there is a procurement event and the delivery and the actual development of this project on the ground, that issues around youth development, issues around engaging historically disadvantaged individuals and groups, issues around transformation and local content are embedded and are part and parcel of the delivery of that project. Thanks, Clement.
Thank you so much. Nina, I just want to bring you in as well as the IDC. When you are financing these and trying to get finance for these projects, how intentional are you, to Nosipo's question about ensuring that the youth are actually benefiting, and you're working even with businesses that are run by young people, and there's actually a consequential benefit for young people in terms of employment and economic opportunity?
Thank you, Clement. So we are very intentional as the IDC. We've had a scheme called GROW-E, Youth Scheme for funding youth, and that's been there for quite a number of years. But over and above that, we've also introduced something called SME Connect. So SME Connect basically looks at where you've got these large-scale projects. I'll take the Lesotho one because that's one that everyone, I suppose, is very familiar with. So SME Connect then says, okay, within this large project, what sort of opportunities do you then have for youth that you can hive off, much smaller, that the youth, especially the ones with limited skills, can then manage? What we've seen, I suppose.
I think you've muted yourself there by mistake, Nina.
Yeah, sorry about that. So what we've seen within our SME Connect, and it's worked well around the mines, is where the mines will give contracts to youth, especially around services such as logistics services, and other mining services that are required. So those are two projects. It's a GROW-E as well as SME Connect. But over and above that, we're also quite intentional with the youth in terms of the employment, looking for employment. So what we then look at in our projects is not just South Africa bringing in goods into the host country, but as well as what is the host country bringing in with regards to youth as well as women within those projects. Thanks, Clement.
Thank you so much for that. There's another question here, Vusi, that was directed to you by William Horn from Media 24, who's asking, could you please confirm whether the percentage of paved roads in SADC is 13% or 30%, and what percentage is paved specifically in South Africa, and how has this developed since 2000?
Thank you. William, it is actually 13.6% of the SADC network paved. In South Africa, you have, out of a network of 750,000 kilometers, of which SANRAL is only responsible for 23,000, by the way, only 158,000 kilometers are paved. You can work out the percentage. I think it's something like 30% paved. How has this developed since 2000? I wouldn't be able to answer for the provincial and municipal road networks, but I can tell you that for the national road network, we've grown the network from some 7,000 kilometers when SANRAL was first established in 1998 to about 23,500 kilometers to date, right? Of course, some of the roads, we inherited them paved, but in a poor condition, and we had to improve them. So at the national level, we have grown the national road network, and the condition of the roads, I can say, by international standards, largely fair, good to excellent.
Thank you so much for that. There's another question here, and I'm gonna ask maybe you as the water department to respond to it, also from William Horn, who's asking, and I'll get other panelists to also respond to this. William Horn wants to know, how has this large infrastructure backlog come about? Is it because the demand for infrastructure too rapidly grew to keep up, or is it due to lack of planning or the lack of implementation of sorts? If you don't mind, I'll ask you maybe to start with that question as the water department.
Thank you so much. The backlog that has accumulated in most instances has been is linked to the population growth, particularly in most of the areas and in Gauteng. So that is why we have some of the issues that are related to sanitation, because the networks that are there can no longer cater for the population that was originally planned for. That is why we are augmenting, and that is why we have also relooked at the whole system, and we are comfortable that what we have relooked and what we have reconfigured, and including the support of our water boards in every province, will be able to reach the target, and in partnership with the municipalities too, and using the facility that we have in terms of water, and including also our special purpose vehicle, TCTA, and all the other water boards, like I've said. Thank you.
Thank you. Vusi, if you can also respond to that, from the work that you've explained still needs to be done, was that due to that lack of planning, as William is asking, or lack of implementation of some sort?
Clement, we find that a lot of the roads, for example, that we are inheriting or that are getting transferred from other roads authorities to SANRAL, are in the state they're in because there was no maintenance. So you could say it was because of lack of planning or lack of resources. But on our side, we are always proactive. We have medium to long-term plans. I mean, I can tell you on the tolling portfolio of our business, we have quite a number of roads that we've planned, but of course things are currently on hold until certain policy matters are resolved. But yes, quite a chunk of what has been handed over to us was due to lack of planning. In fact, premiers, a number of premiers are keen to transfer to SANRAL some of their strategic roads because they know they will be properly planned, they'll be properly maintained and funded.
Okay. Mametsi, there's a question here about funding. William wants to know that you mentioned $350 billion by 2040. That's how much you're estimating you're going to need. And he says that comes down to almost 500 billion per year, 500 billion rand per year for the next 15 years. That is an equivalent of 8% of South Africa's GDP every year on infrastructure. How does Infrastructure South Africa believe this is possible? Obviously, you did mention earlier, and maybe you can re-emphasize that this is not like what government does on its own. That's why those strategic partnerships are important. That's why it's important to bring in the private sector as well, so that you're able to at least get to that goal of $350 billion that you need by 2042 to address these strategic projects that you're planning.
Indeed, Clement. So the figure that I quoted as well was more from a SADC perspective, so from the regional perspective. So that's what our numbers, that's the quotation and the statistics that we picked up from the work done by the NEPAD, the AU, PIDA, and others in relation to infrastructure investment projects and where they project to the type of infrastructure that's required and the quantum of funding that will be required by 2040. So that's the gap that has been identified as a financing gap, and that's the number that I quoted. So coming back to the South African environment, the National Infrastructure Plan as well as the National Development Plan, and these documents they work in tandem insofar as an infrastructure investment is concerned. So it says that 2/3 of all infrastructure investments must be private sector led. And so there will be requirements on the part of government to ensure that that is enabled. One of them is the policy and regulatory environment. It must be conducive for the private sector to invest in these infrastructure projects. For example, some of the private sector-led infrastructure projects are currently stranded because municipalities don't have the funding or the money to provide municipal bulk infrastructure. So sewage, municipal roads, electrification, etc. Because of that, the infrastructure, the investments by private sector are stranded. So the government's role is to ensure that there is the policy and regulatory environment is enabling for private sector to invest more in infrastructure. And secondly, the issues around mechanisms, making it easier for the private sector to also finance and provide technical capacity for the delivery of government infrastructure projects. So that component is something that we are working on together with the National Treasury, and you would have seen as well the announcement by the Minister of Finance in his budget speech around that we're working on mechanisms of enabling the onboarding of private sector finance as well as technical capacity to be able to deliver these projects. So only 1/3 of the amount that is required on an annual basis for us to reach the 2030 development goals must come from government. So meaning that if we are just able to spend the allocated funds, so Treasury allocates almost over 900 billion over a 3-year period for capital projects. If we don't surrender any of that funding and we execute as a state, as government, as the public sector, that will go a long way in terms of closing that infrastructure investment gap. And just to add on the question around why we find ourselves in this space where there is such a massive infrastructure backlog, just to add, in addition to what the other panelists have already articulated, Clement, is the issues around institutional arrangements when it comes to infrastructure development and infrastructure investment. So the current legal construct is that, you know, municipalities, provinces, national governments have got original powers. They've got original powers, but to find that coherence and alignment and to work systematically towards a common goal has been a challenge, and that is the gap that we're also closing as ISA, or part of our mandate is to ensure that there's a seamless integration of processes, of systems across the spheres of government to be able to deliver on national priority projects. Issues around the decimation of financial and technical engineering capacity over a long period of time in government. So those skill sets have been hollowed out. And so to replenish those skill sets and to rebuild them as quickly as possible will take us long. And in Infrastructure South Africa, we work very closely with the private sector to close that skill sets deficit, essentially in the preparation and packaging of business cases for infrastructure projects. And then the last one is around the legal regime for financing of public infrastructure projects by the private sector. So the percentage of PPPs in relation to the total basket of, or the total infrastructure project pipeline amounts to 2% or less. So we want to be able to ramp up that element of the percentage and the number of projects that are PPPs in nature. That way, one, you are alleviating the constraint on the fiscus for the financing of those projects, but by bringing in the private sector, you're also addressing the issues of capacity constraints. So both just the planning, financing, as well as implementation of these projects. So the element around PPPs and blended finance candidate projects are going to be key in us closing that infrastructure investment gap going forward. Thank you, Clement.
Thank you, Mameti. Leboane, I just want to bring you in to maybe give us a sense of what the prize is, and maybe even the prize money is for the SADC Media Awards.
Yes, so the winner of the competition across the region gets $2,500. So if we were to look at the South African rands, we're looking at around 48,000 rand for the winner, and then the runner-up is $1,000. Looking at today's rate, that's about 19,000 rand for the runner-up. And these are esteemed awards, ones where you get them in front of all 16 heads of states at the same time, gathered in one room. And just quickly, just to note that we do have durations that we have put for the different categories. For instance, when we talk about print, your story should not be longer than 2,000 words, the one that you will be submitting. And for radio, the piece should not be longer than 30 minutes. And for television, it should not, whether it's a documentary or it's a story, it should not be longer than 45 minutes. While for photojournalism, we allow photos from 1 up until 20. So it's either you give us a collage or just that one entry. And if you've forgotten everything that I said today, you can contact Mpho Phatudi at GCIS. It's m@gcis.co.za. All the information is also on their social media platforms for further looking into.
Lindiwe, I just wanted you to maybe weigh in on what Mametsi was raising around the issue of capacity and the skill set. How big of a concern is that as the Department of Water and Sanitation when you are working on your specific project? And how are you trying to rebuild that issue of capacity and skills?
Yes, the issue of capacity and skill is a problem. As I've mentioned, that is why the minister has reconfigured the water boards so that the water boards could be able to assist us in the projects, particularly when we are dealing with municipalities. You've noted that the water boards are now covering, like one water board will cover the whole province. And also there's an example, a good example that is happening already with that Umkomazi project. And also with the metro in KZN, the Umgeni Utukela is working closely with the metro to be able to look at the wastewater treatment plants. And there are many more such examples. However, what is important is that there is sharing of capacity, and also this capacity also we get from the private sector partners that are involved. For an example, with the Valhamahara, that is an expectation as we are forming that project going forward, and together with the department, the way it is being configured. Furthermore, the last one, you may be aware that the department is finalizing the bill on the infrastructure, water infrastructure agency. That agency will play that role to ensure that it covers all the issues of infrastructure package in the water sector. So we are hopeful that with these reconfigured forms of institutions, we'll be in a better space to be able to address the challenges that we've listed and also achieve the targets of the projects that we've set, because we want to make sure that starting from 2028, like in the Lesotho Highlands water projects, we have achieved our targets, particularly even with the main projects that I've listed. Thank you.
Yes. Vusi, what do you have any timelines in the short, in the medium and long term in terms of closing the gap? Because it looks like there's so much work to do here when you are trying to work on this road infrastructure and the development of this road infrastructure to increase and advance that regional integration. What are the timelines in terms of SANRAL's plans?
Look, Clement, when it comes to your regional projects, which are in their nature, country to country, bilateral, one may not be in a position to talk timelines, but let me give you the N2N3 corridor, right, which links us to Beitbridge and north of Beitbridge. It's a multi-year project that we started a year or two ago. We are looking at finishing this in the next 5 to 7 years, because it's quite an involved project.
All right, thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so continue.
And when it comes to our own projects, in SANRAL projects within the country, I'm sure colleagues will be aware there is a backlog which was occasioned by COVID-19. We're still trying to recover from that, but we are pushing as fast and as much as we can. All those projects that we couldn't go to market to, either because of COVID and regulation issues. At some stage, there was an impasse between us and Treasury. As a result, a number of projects fell behind. We are trying to catch up on those. Towards the end of last year, for example, we pushed out about 77 projects. We're billions of rands. So by close of this year, the relatively new CEO has challenged us that with the new fiscal starts, we should have closed that backlog.
And Nina, do you guys have some plans around how many projects you probably want to finance in the region in the short or long term? What are you looking at in terms of your financing plans?
In terms of our financing plans, Clement, we have put aside, I think it's about 3.5 billion rand per annum. So we're looking at the total book for the IDC reaching about 15% as infrastructure in the next 3 or so years. So anywhere between 3.5 and 4 billion rand per annum. We don't have a number of projects, but it's them that the value target that we're looking at.
Wonderful. I think we have managed to get through. I just want to check if I'm not missing any of the questions from some of our participants here. I think, yeah, just again, if you want to submit for the SADC Media Awards, mpopi@gcis.gov.za. That's the email address. The number there to dial is 079 this is quite an important conversation when we talk about regional integration, and this was just the first conversation that GCIS in partnerships with the other institutions like Infrastructure South Africa, Water and Sanitation, the South African National Roads Agency Limited, the Industrial Development Corporation. This is just the first of a series of conversations that the GCIS is planning. And today the focus has been on infrastructure. Just please be on the lookout for another conversation that will be coming up, which will be focusing on tourism in the region, because that's another important sector that is also key for our economic growth, not only as South Africa, but as the SADC region. So that's going to be the next conversation in a series that GCIS, series of panel discussion that GCIS has been planning. So thank you so much to the panelists, Lindiwe Lusenga, who is the DDG for Provincial Entity Governance and International Cooperation at the Department of Water and Sanitation. Thank you to Mametsi Masamula, who is the Head of Infrastructure South Africa. Thanks to Vusimona, the Head of Marketing and Communications at the South African National Roads Limited Agency. Nina Yose, thanks to you. She's the Head of Infrastructure at the IDC, responsible for infrastructure investments in South Africa and the rest of the African continent. And of course, Libuwani Muchachi, who is the former chairperson for the SADC Media Awards. And thanks to you for being part of this panel discussion. Hope to see you at the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clement. Thank you.